I hate Taylor Swift.
You hate Taylor Swift. That'll piss a lot more people off.
I know I'm very lonely on this island. We've got a Champions League final preview.
I wanted to start this off with, Evan, give me, without any context, the score of this final in your mind.
2-1 Barcelona.
Yeah, I'm 2-0 Barcelona. And I think what that's saying here is, at least on my end, is Barcelona is just so much better as a control team than Lyon, even though control is the guiding principle of both of these teams. When control meets control, I feel like ultimately one team ends up really forcing the hand. And when you think about what happened to Barca in the final last year, it was that Arsenal very much conceded right from the jump that they were not going to be in control for large portions of this game. That actually worked out for them. But in this game, I can't imagine Lyon coming out in a defensive posture and absorbing a lot of pressure.
That's one thing. I think the other thing is that looking at the state of Lyon's lineup, it's not optimized to match Barcelona on a lot of zones of the field. For one thing, it's not Jonah Heraldez's interest to play Damaris Aguirola from first whistle. She got into the Premier League semi-final because the French domestic league actually has a mini playoff to determine its champion among the top 4 finishers in the league table. The 8-0 drubbing of Nantes that Lyon gave in that semi-final might suggest that Damaris starting doesn't mean that Heraldez all of a sudden has more faith in her. It's that probably wanted to rest Lily Johannes and Lindsay Heaps for the actual important game coming down the pike. But Damaris is the only one with any type of defensive discipline. Corbin Schrader can get stuck in. Lindsay Heaps can get stuck in, but they don't have the mobility to actually be positionally disciplined and effective defensive midfielders. And then Lily Johannes, that's not her role. If all of a sudden she's the one expected to put in more two-way energy against the likes of Alexia Putellas and Patrick Guijarro, that spells trouble. Whether it's Heaps and Johannes or Heaps and Schrader, the midfield is going to be very quickly lost by Lyon. It only adds to Lyon's troubles that Kadidiatou Diani tore her LCL in the second leg of the Champions League semifinal, and Vicky Becho is taking her spot. Vicky Becho has a lot of quality. She's 22. She's young. She's a perennial bench attacking weapon for both Lyon and the French national team, even though she wasn't named to the French squad for the Euros last summer. It's a massive, massive step down. The logical replacement for somebody like Diani, Tabitha Chewinga, has been dealing with her own injury problems and got a substitute appearance in the domestic league semifinal over the weekend. But does that mean she's going to start? Is she going to be 90 minutes match fit or 60 minutes match fit? Heraldez will probably go to Becho first, but that just means you have a massive attacking hole on your right side. That also means that Esme Brooks will have a field day with you when you try to press from the front. That's very, very worrisome. We talked about in our Champions League semifinal recap that Lyon had a shot, but at that point, we didn't know the extent of Diani's injury. We have more clarity on that now. This is a real problem for Lyon.
It's not like Barcelona aren't carrying injuries into this game, which we'll get into in a minute. You've identified in Becho one of the obvious places for breakdown. For me, the other is how much are you going to be getting out of Melchi Demornay in a defensive capacity? When you need that numerical balance in the midfield to cause problems and to ask questions of Barcelona's own somewhat unsettled, at least for Barcelona, midfield in this matchup, you would actually need a lot from Melchi in a game with 2 solid defensive midfielders. In a game without 2 solid defensive midfielders, or 2 midfielders who just aren't inclined to play a lot of defense, plus her, you're really behind it.
It's not as though Demornay has no defensive capabilities. She pressured the ball well in the second leg against Arsenal. She put in a good defensive shift. But Arsenal's center backs and Kim Little are a mile away in terms of their ability to play the ball out of the back than what Mapi Leon, Patrick Guijarro, and most likely Irene Paredes will offer you. It's just night and day. When you have such good, such quick one-touch passers with such effective off-ball running to create open lanes further up the field in the way that Barcelona have, Melchi Demornay's strength becomes something that Barcelona can use to their advantage, i.e. her desire and her ability to just move everywhere on the field. She has the potential to be chasing shadows while she gets passed around.
Barcelona picks apart free players.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think part of Arsenal's joy that they found last year in the final is that they were really drilled and didn't have a lot of free exploratory types. Lyon is designed to fluidly find space. I even think a traditional winger like Brand here has some of that as an impulse. That doesn't mean that Lyon can't find seams or catch breaks. It's that Barcelona may just end up controlling them to a point of dragging Lyon players into positions they don't want to be in to begin with.
And that creates a domino effect. If De Mornay is pulled over by something that Esme Brutes is doing as she gets upfield, and Brand has to slide in to fill the gap, then once you get the ball back, that just puts more pressure for Salma Basha to get upfield and fill that attacking channel, which then creates a gap further back or forces Johannes or Schraders to slide forward. Once again, you are moving all of the dominoes around. Barcelona is going to have some player where they can create an overload and create a mismatch. It's the line that you always bring up, the Rafa Benitez line. Tactics is a blanket that is a foot too short, and either your head's going to be too cold or your feet's going to be too cold, and neither can be warm at the same time. This is a game plan that Barcelona is completely drilled for. How did Arsenal find success last year? How did Chelsea find success in the Champions League semifinal 2 years ago, or at least in the first leg? You do not allow Patri and Aitana, or whoever is going to be playing in Aitana's place, to create passing lanes. You use all of your midfield and probably a couple of extra spare players to basically create a shell around them that they can't breathe. Lyon cannot offer you that.
Most of you are listening on audio. I'm just sitting here nodding as Evan says all of this because I agree. Now, if this is knowable to us, it's certainly knowable to Jonathan Heraldez.
Yeah, who literally trained his successor on the touchline at Barcelona.
How does Jonathan Heraldez take apart his own project? That's what is most exciting about this final for me. I also just don't think he quite has the pieces to do it.
I don't think so either. Again, if you're not committed to playing a true defensive central midfielder like Damaris, this is what's going to happen.
If Damaris was in the starting lineup for the final, it would immediately complicate my view of this game. I don't think it's going to happen. I also think that back line, Angen looked absolutely terrible over two legs. I think that back line is significantly softer. They were forced into all kinds of errors against Arsenal. You think about that Olivia Smith goal, Barcelona will force 6 of those from you a game. Even if Basha is excellent, I just don't have a lot of faith in the rest of that back line to be able to handle, and let's be fair, the best team in the world.
The one place where they might be able to find an answer on the other side is who's actually attempting to score the goals in the center of the park, because some questions around Ada Hegerberg, I tried to dig into this. Hegerberg didn't even make the bench for the Coupe de France final, and then only played 29 minutes off the bench for the league semifinal. Is she hurt? Does she have a knock? Are they minding her minutes? Or are they just stashing her for the game that actually matters? I couldn't really find a clear answer for that. But you and I both agree that Marie-Antoinette Katoto has some more to potentially unsettle whatever center back pairing Barcelona is going to throw out. And there are some question marks about that right now, because Irene Paredes picked up a knock in the lead up to the Copa de la Reina final over the weekend and didn't play. Pere Romeo said in a press conference that they do expect her to be available for Saturday, but what he didn't specify was starter or bench. Katoto, if she happens to start, whether it's Irene Paredes or Aicha Kamara sliding over from right back into right-sided center back to replace her, it doesn't really matter. You have a player deep into her 30s or a player who hasn't even 20 yet, each of which have weaknesses that a player with really good off-the-shoulder and quick burst abilities could exploit. It's not as though it's completely hopeless. If it's Katoto or if it's Hegerberg, they do have to get the ball first.
I certainly think if Lyon is to win this game, and it is a one-off, obviously it can happen, it comes down to the fact that they have in Brand and Katoto 2 players who are individually brilliant enough to create something sort of out of nothing. That will keep them in the game if this game is close. This will keep their victory in regulation viable if they can keep it close. I sort of suspect that if Lyon's going to be successful, it'll look kind of like the goals that Bayern ended up racking up against them in the semifinal. The question is Lyon's defense better than Bayern at being able to withstand the onslaught of pressure that they will get from a very deep front line and a midfield that, regardless of injury, is also quite deep and versatile? I don't really know. If Orion Paredes is unavailable to go, there's a slightly soft underbelly there to be got at.
But again, how do you get the ball to your forwards to try and like poke holes in that? When you look at all of the questions that Pere Romeo is going to have to answer with his lineup, every position has a pretty good substitute and can offer different things. I mean, it's interesting. Claudia Pina got the start against Arsenal in the final last year over Salma Parayuelo. Probably was the wrong call, because Salma has much more straight line speed and probably could have
stretch a defense.
Was probably needed against a really compact way of playing that Arsenal offered. Lyon probably won't have that to offer. Claudia, who is better on the ball and is much more incisive, will probably be the starter. But
I'm not as convinced of that, to be honest. I love Salma's speed against that back line. I don't think that there's a wrong choice here. I think that what you get between the lines from Claudia Pina and what you get in ability to extend a defense from Salma are both deadly. It's really just a question of what kind of space you want to make for Eva Payor.
I hadn't finished my point, which is that like it seems like Pere Romeo favors Claudia in these situations.
I do think that that's right.
Salma's had plenty of starts recently in big games, but I think that is more injury driven in like how he's wanted to rotate talent. But if you are struggling to find a winner in the second half, Salma is a pretty deadly weapon to come off the bench. Caroline Graham-Hansen is another fitness question, a player that Romeo also said was supposed to be available for Saturday, but did that mean starting or off the bench? We don't know. But Vicky Lopez is a pretty great replacement for her and has demonstrated that over and over again recently. There are really no holes. It's then a champagne problem of how do you balance the two midfielders who are ahead of Patry? Is Aitana ready to start? Is that unfair to Aitana? If she is, because she hasn't started in months and this is a Champions League final, does that matter? Because her eventual replacement, Clara Sarajordi, has looked good in small samples. Also, you could keep Aitana and Clara both on the bench, pull Alexia deeper, and stick either Claudia or Vicky in the 10, which would then make room for Salma to start out on the left. There are just so many permutations here, and none of them seem weak.
The proactive Lyon approach is essentially find ways to stretch Patry with Heaps and Dumornay. The problem of that, of course, is, well, how do you get them the ball in the first place? So if there's a soft underbelly here, or if there's a space to be exploited, it is in how much Lyon can ISO Patry. But this midfield of Barca's, regardless of who you plug and play, is well drilled enough to not leave any of their midfielders on an island.
Well, and also if Patry is isolated and is on the ball, these players are such good passers. They have demonstrated that they are happy to go over the top. And the difference with Barcelona going long in the air and another team going long in the air is that Barca can drop those kinds of passes on a dime, whereas a lot of teams are playing long switches or long balls out of the back in just a desperation move to try and get the ball closer to the goal and then figure it out from there. Patry can drop it 60 yards to Vicky's feet if she wants to.
It's another argument in favor of Salma in this particular instance, which is, will Salma create more space for everyone else by simply extending the defense and forcing them to play a certain way if the need to go long exists?
My hunch is that Aitana and Caroline Graham-Hansen will start the game on the bench.
I agree.
And if that happens, then guess what? You get to play Claudia and Salma together. Because Vicky goes out to the right wing, Salma goes out to the left, Claudia comes in underneath to be an in-out lock picker, and you just push Alexia deeper. I mean, they're going to play double tens, but Alexia can be your like defense, soak up the defensive responsibility.
Trailing 10.
Yeah, exactly. A trailing 10, an advanced 8, whatever, a free 8. All those, you don't have to make any of those hard decisions, And then also, you have Caroline Graham-Hansen, Aitana Bonmati, both coming off of the bench. Fuck, dude.
And the power of having those kinds of players on the bench is you can change the weighting of your lines whenever you want. If you need to become more defensive through possession, you have Aitana and you can take an attacker off.
Yep.
And if you're chasing the game or need to break through the game, you can take off Alexia and you can bring on Caroline Graham-Hansen, and suddenly you're just in overwhelm mode. The challenge of beating Barcelona, and Arsenal proved it last year, is you need two things to happen. You need to defend and absorb enough pressure and then get lucky and find a break. And it's not that Arsenal got lucky in winning the final last year. It's that, I mean, they did get a little lucky, but also they had a perfect game plan and actually personnel reasonably well drilled because they played in the WSL at playing out of possession or playing teams that wanted to control the game more than they wanted to control the game. And that just isn't true at all for Lyon, who've put up jaw-dropping numbers throughout the Champions League. But they've also just not had to deal in the same way with a Barcelona.
It seems like you have to try and run down their gut early to score early and maybe shift the game state. Seems like the best opportunity for you to do that is to have Melchi Demorny create some chaos early, play a very high counter pressing approach rather than that swallow up the midfield whole approach, because you don't have the midfield to do it. And if you can get Atri, or if you can get Aicha Kamara, if she's starting unsettled, then maybe Demorny gets on the ball quickly and you can break with Katoto in behind and snatch an early goal. But will Heraldez trust Katoto to start? I don't know.
I don't know either.
There will be or rather, I should say, I hope that there is an inquest after this season is over as to what was going on between Jonah Heraldez and Marie-Antoinette Katoto, because she ended up being the odd player out over and over again on that front line. And it didn't matter for basically anything except maybe this game and maybe the Champions League semifinal, which they skated through.
They've not played Barcelona and therefore have not played a Barcelona-like opponent. This is a really, really high peak to try to summit. This is a very real challenge that they have not faced.
I do not think Katoto is going to be named to the 11. So if you have a striker who, granted, is a world-class striker, but is 3 years older and is just half a step slower, that just presents fewer challenges for a center back pairing that may be a little shaky, either through coming back from fitness and being on the older side, or through not playing much together and having a 19-year-old playing out of position. That could have been an advantage for you. And I don't think Ada Hegerberg exploits that advantage. 2-1 to Barcelona is reflective of that fact that finals are generally played pretty tight, even if one team has a noted talent advantage. So it still feels fair to me, but I don't think that one Lyon goal comes as an early lead or an equalizer. I think it comes as a freebie near the end of the game.
I will stick with my 2-0. 2-0 could also be 4-0 or 1-0. I just don't know where the goal comes outside of a moment of individual brilliance from Lyon. But could be wrong. Jonathan Heraldez, I'm sure he's having plenty of low sleep nights of late. That said, he does know this team better than anyone else. Maybe he has the nuclear codes to all of the Barcelona players. I don't think he does. I don't think that's how it works. I don't think managers matter that much.
This is actually a good test for that theory, because if there's any coach who would know, as you say, how to beat this Barcelona side, it would be Jonathan Heraldez. But if he doesn't have the players, that would suggest that maybe he is more insignificant than most people want to assume coaches are.
Let's talk about the venue before we go. UWCL Stadium in Oslo, which is small.
It's the biggest stadium in Norway, a little over 27,000 capacity for a game like this.
That's like saying Providence Park's the biggest stadium in Oregon.
Exactly.
Those two places are basically the same size, with similar distribution of populations.
What I have not been able to dig up is why this venue was chosen. The bidding process was decided on 2 years ago in tandem with the 2027 final, and that's going to be played at a 50,000-seater in Poland, if I'm not mistaken. And generally speaking, even for the Women's Champions League final now, venue over 30,000 capacity is preferred. Hampden Park in Glasgow and the Narkestadion in Stuttgart were the other two bids. So why did Oslo get picked when they are half the capacity of either of those places? I haven't been able to track down an answer, but it is a little disappointing when the Camp Nou Champions League semifinal second leg will have 3 times the fans that the final does. And that's happened in the past because ever since Barcelona Feminine moved to the Camp Nou to play these knockout stages at home, they're always going to pack more in. You would have hoped that the standards for these things had been progressing in the right direction. And again, if you prefer a 30,000 or more capacity venue and you had 2 of those that fit the bill to choose from, why did you go with Oslo?
Also, the stadium's relatively old.
That's another thing. And my only theory is that maybe the Norwegian Football Federation are ready to put more marketing muscle behind it because they're traditionally more supportive of women's football than Scotland and Germany, I guess. That feels like thin gruel here. And then without that, I just really don't have an answer for you, unless it's just blatant corruption. Which I guess it could be, but I don't know. Norway doesn't feel like they would do that. But again, I don't know.
I still expect this game to be a sellout. The atmosphere will probably be fine.
Setting aside 2020 and 2021 because of the COVID of it all, this will be the lightest attended Women's Champions League final since 2019.
Bummer. That said, I hear Oslo's beautiful.
If you're Barcelona or a Lyon fan traveling to the game, I think you're going to have a great time this week. It's going to be very fucking expensive for you, because that's just how Norway rolls. But that is the Champions League final. We will be on Patreon next week to break down the game and maybe also take a 30,000-foot view about where both of these clubs are in their phase of development, because I think we've talked about it a little bit on past episodes, but once we get the Champions League final behind us, it'll be good to sit and reflect on the, I think, different directions both of these organizations are heading, not necessarily for the worse, but are planning their futures in very different ways.
2 teams with 25 or so serious games to play for the rest of the decade after the final.
Yeah, that's not changing, sadly. Would that it were. Anyway, we'll be back with you for that recap next week and back with you on main feed for more NWSL action.
Bye, guys.
Bye.